Hey listeners, welcome to the atintellect podcast. Today we have with us a very special guest, Nishu Goel. Nishu works as a software engineer with epilot on their micro-frontend architecture. She writes TypeScript and Golang at work with a focus on the performance aspect of the codebase. Nishu is one of the most passionate programmers that I've ever come across. In 2019, she authored a book called Angular Routing, and then last year she authored the JavaScript chapter for the Web Alamanack. I read the entire chapter, and the depth and detailing captured in that article is unparalleled. She's also recognized as a Google developer expert for web technologies and Angular framework, and as Microsoft's MVP, that is, most valuable professional for developer technologies. With her love for sharing what she learns, she's also a mentor at the Society of Women Engineers. You can read her writings on her blog unravelweb.dev, and you can also find her on LinkedIn by the name Nishu Goel, and on Twitter with the handle the Nishu Goel. All relevant sources, links, and book recommendations discussed in this podcast will be mentioned in the show notes below. So without further ado, let's jump straight in the show. Hey Nishu, welcome to the atintellect podcast. It's really great to have you here. I know you have been really busy in the last couple of weeks with the job change and other projects that you have, but thanks for taking out the time to do this.
That's a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me, Kinshuk. I hope that the session goes well.
Yep, definitely. We have a really interesting story lined up ahead of us. So we'll start with your journey first. So you graduated in 2018 from Maharashtra University with a BTech in computer science, and then joined IBM as a front-end engineer, which I think was from your campus only, right? Then you worked at IBM for a little less than 2 years, then moved to Web Data Works, which I believe is a startup based in Ireland. And you transitioned as a full stack engineer. And then you recently moved to epilot, which is, I think, based in Germany, again as a full stack engineer. So we'll start with the university days. So just was curious, how was your engineering experience like? Like, were you always very studious? And then how did IBM happen? And then how was your progression from IBM to epilot?
Right. That's quite some well-researched data. Correct. I worked with IBM for little less than 2 years. I would actually start with my engineering journey, right? I think that was the first part of your question. And I wouldn't say I was very studious back then. I was trying to, be a person who's involved in extracurriculars as well as, getting getting good grades at, studies as well. So I remember participating in coding competitions back at the university. My first participation was in Microsoft Imagine Cup nationals. I mean, we went to nationals for 2 years straight, and it was a very good experience in terms of the networks that we built there, and also in terms of the coding exposure that you get, because you develop projects for competition, right? It's not just a side project of yours which you're trying to build something, or something cool for someone. It's actually a competitive project that you do. So that was a good learning experience in terms of the coding journey, as well as the networks that you build on the way. Also a bit on the presentation side of things, because you have to pitch your idea, right? You have to pitch the code that you implemented and how it works towards a cause of a particular thing. When I say a cause, I mean, I'll give you one example, right, of the project that I built when I was working for when I was doing the Imagine Cup. So it was based on the education of a girl child, and the idea was that in a game that we built, a girl child, which was the character of the game, she runs towards the education, which means she has to collect coins in the first level of the game. If she collects a certain number of coins, she goes to the next level of the game, which is a DK round, right? So this is basically after earning some money, you get into the next round, which is education. So that was the idea. And I built some great contacts there, obviously, for 2 years. I think that was the exposure towards engineering in general. Back at university, we are not taught very practically in terms of what we are going to use in the industry, right? So my experience with the hackathons was definitely something that, pushed me forward towards coding. That was, I think, at the university. Apart from that, I wouldn't say that I was really studious in general.
Mhm.
I think to answer the second part of your question, which is my transition from being a front-end developer to full stack at the other jobs that I did. So with IBM, when I was working, my sole focus was to work on the web. I was also new into, the industry and the corporate in general. So the idea was to just focus on web and learn the UI part of things, right? The building websites, building reusable components. For example, we see the web today is so componentized. It's in form of small components. It's not like one page and you don't go from directly from one page to another, but basically from different views, right? So that's what I was doing there at UI Garage within IBM. And
Mhm.
we were doing Angular, we were doing some other frameworks of JavaScript as well. That was the beginning, but this web space is huge now. Earlier we used to say that, oh, I've done enough UI and now I can, directly transition into the backend, which today is not true, because web is so vast. There's performance that comes into picture. There's, different frameworks. You don't have to upskill yourself on all the frameworks, but you definitely need to upskill yourself with, writing better JavaScript.
Mhm.
So my transition to full stack began when I actually needed it for myself, right? When I was building websites, but where does the data come from? So I
Mhm.
didn't want to be held up on any other sources of maybe resources, right? Or any other sources that could get me the data. So that's when my foray into learning Golang for building the backend of my application started. And I was earlier, like as the initial steps, I was just doing CRUD, which is the create, read, delete, update operations. I was
Mhm.
doing that in Golang, but later it also, transitioned into writing services for my system in general. So I was
Okay.
writing services with Golang, and that was a pretty interesting step in my career, I would say, because transitioning from front end to back end is always very challenging and
Yeah.
interesting. You all of a sudden move from something that used to show you a lot of output in terms of the front end, in terms of the UI, to back end, which doesn't really show you an output but then works great, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of the transition from a front end based role to full stack. And now at epilot, I'm doing something similar. I'm doing micro front ends on the front end side of things, which is
Mhm.
using any frameworks that one likes. You are not bound to one framework. If you like Angular, you could build one particular feature in Angular, but then the other in whatever framework of your choice. On the back end, we are doing microservices. It's based around AWS. And yeah,
Mhm.
there's more to explore.
Perfect. Perfect. That's I think great story. Definitely, I understand how difficult it is for a front end engineer, especially in the initial phase, to learn backend and then absorb it, like what's happening. Because one of my really good friends is a front end engineer, and he's currently in that transition phase. So whenever we talk, he's just um, telling me his perils at work, and how he's struggling with backend. But I think you manage it fairly well in a fairly short period of time, which is amazing. One quick question, although we have like a segment dedicated to it, but how did you choose Golang? Like, I think it's a fairly new language, or right, in the whole backend space. So was it like your organization's choice, or was it your personal choice to learn that?
Uh, that's a very good question. So I would like to answer it in two parts. Number one, it was already being used in the organization, but we as engineers, it was in my second organization. We as engineers were never bound to using the existing technology. So we used to do our own research to decide that, okay, this is a particular feature and this is how I want to write it, right? Using this particular language. So when I was supposed to write the backend, I got to do my own research, and at that time, I remember I was struggling to choose between Python or Golang or Rust. Right
Okay.
now, with Rust, that's not an easy language to start with,
Mm.
and also when you're starting your first backend project. So and I know it's great for memory management, but I think that was not the the language for me at that point of time. With Python is good for writing small scripts that I understood at that point, and I was already writing a lot of scripts, to scrape websites, for example, using Python. But for a project that where a lot of memory leaks could be possible, right, that's where I think I decided to choose Golang, also because I was already exploring that as a side hustle, and I had some background in Golang as a language, so decided to go with that. And about your question where it gets difficult to transition from front end to full stack, I would say it's always better when you're coming from front end space to the back end, because that's when you understand how, the perspective of a front end developer. You understand that if the data is presented in this particular format, it's going to be best used by the front end developer. You understand? Because if the data is presented in a way which is most presentable, that's the best thing. As a backend developer, I can send a string of data, right, which might not be very easily parsed by the developer who's working on the front end. So yeah, it's always a good combination if you're coming from the front end space into the back end.
Great. No, I think that's a great perspective to look at in a way that, yeah, it's definitely better coming from a front end developer to a back end developer. It really opens up that world of, I always say that behind the scenes part of it, and you can always explore what's happening and where the data pipelines and where you're getting the data from. So that's great. And I think another thing which just came to my mind is that a sort of a unique difference between working for a huge, like large big tech organizations and the like comparatively smaller or medium sized players is that a lot of time for these big organizations, the language which is already being used will directly or indirectly pushed to you, like you have to learn this. But as you said, in small medium sized organizations, you like the developers have a choice to pivot to a newer language, a newer framework which might be better or more suitable for the project. Because uh, when I talk to friends of mine who are in the same space and they're working, let's say, for a client, for a very large organization, they don't have a choice really to choose, really, to like do things from scratch. They like a project is going on that, and they have to learn that particular framework or language for that. So it kind of limits your exploratory abilities and learning as well. So I think you got lucky, and you're working with an organization who really values the coder's choice of the language, and you were able to pick what was the best for the project and for you as well to learn. So that's, I think, a great thing. If you could also share an experience, how was it like pivoting from IBM to you know definitely a small or medium sized organization?
Right. I think at first, to add to what you said about the flexibility of choosing your own technology, this is actually fair, because when you're working in a larger organization, a lot of it depends on the legacy systems. A lot of it depends on the number of people who are working. So for example, you decide to choose Golang all of a sudden, and there are 100 other people who are dependent on that. They can't upskill themselves. Maybe you are faster at upskilling yourself in a particular language, maybe the other people are not, right? So it creates a difficult environment, and you wouldn't want to get into that. What if your existing code base is written in a language which cannot interact very easily with Golang as the new interface, right? So all of those factors come into place when you're working in a larger organization, and that's totally fair, right? If you're working in a smaller organization, there's only a few people. The other engineer might, they can decide themselves if they want to upskill themselves in the other technology that's chosen or not. And also, there are not many legacy systems, right, which you have to think of when deciding a technology. So the choice and the environment depends a lot on that.
Yeah, yeah. So you felt that when you pivoted from IBM to like probably I think web data works, right? Where you were more open to I think test with certain languages and decide what's best for a project.
Actually, it's an interesting question because even at IBM, I didn't feel that. Reason is I was working with UI Garage at IBM, right? And it was a garage kind of a setup wherein, again, there's like very few people, you're working on small duration projects and you get to decide, oh, this is the client who's requiring this particular thing to be built in, right? And you get to decide that this technology, will take me, okay, 3 months, or maybe this requires a learning curve and I might need some learning on the job, and this might take more time, so you decide to not choose that technology. So at UI Garage, that was the case. We got to choose our own technology, but I can imagine if it's not like a setup like this where there are code bases of a particular client from before, you might not get the choice, definitely, because obviously there are a lot of people depending on that, a lot of other code bases, existing code bases depending on that. But yeah, I think, yeah, you can say I was lucky in that regards, that I got to choose my own technology even when I was working with IBM. But yeah, that really helps us in our career. And even if it doesn't, we always have our side hustle time, right, where we are hustling and learning the technology that we like. Yep.
Definitely. That's a great way to put it. And yeah, definitely you had like those great experiences within uh, IBM as well. It was kind of a mini startup with a larger company, from what I can understand. So that's great. Cool.
That's exactly how I would have liked to put it.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Moving ahead. So when I was preparing for this podcast, I was going through your LinkedIn, and I was going through a blog as well, unravelweb.dev, which you quote as your digital garden. I think it's a really nice name for a blog. I was going through the posts and everything. So I think the space is mainly you put a lot of your technology research articles out there, and then you also pen down your thoughts. So I think it's a mix of both. Um, and then you also wrote a book on Angular, which I saw on your blog. So that's great. And then I think your recent most significant work was with the Web Alamanack. I read it while preparing for this podcast. It was after a really long time I read something which was that tech heavy, because I'm not really into tech now. But I could, like 90% of it was just going through my head, but I could gather what the 10% of the story. So I think it's basically a primer on how JavaScript has evolved through the years, although you will be able to better define that. But I think nevertheless was great research heavy piece, which I could gather from the entire article. So just wanted to get, like, I was curious about a couple of things when I was reading it. So um, one is like a macro question in which so throughout your entire coding journey, right, when did you realize that you just don't want to be at the consumer end of the code, which I say, but also you want to contribute to the larger community? So the way I see it is that um, I think 80% of the entire community is a consumer on Stack Overflow, but the rest 20% really contributes with the articles and contributes to the solutions. So when did you decide to be that unique 20% group? And the second question would be around the Web Almanac. So it's kind of a research heavy article. So how did that idea came along, and then how was your process? How much time do you take to gather all that data points and put your story with the Almanac?
Yeah. Yeah, I might forget all the questions that were
Cool. No,
included.
we'll go step by step. So the first one is like, when did you decide to be, a contributor to the community rather than just a consumer to the coding community?
Right. I see you've done a lot of research and a lot of stalking my profiles, right? Which is great. The digital garden thing, I like to put it that way because it's like a creative representation of something a bit boring. That might sound to others, but maybe, for some people it doesn't sound boring at all. So yeah, to answer your question about being on the not being on the consumer side, but also on the content creator side. So I would say it was not like a realization really, right, that I felt that, oh, I should contribute to the community, oh, I've learned a lot, now I should go back and give back to the community. I don't think I've felt like that. It's just been a few years of me being in the industry, and it would be too early to say that, oh, now I feel that, oh, I should give back to the community, right? It's not that. I think it goes in parallel with especially in my case, it goes in parallel with when I'm learning. And the first blog post that I wrote was with the similar thought that I'm learning this. What if I forget that at a later stage? How about I just pen it down and come back to it when maybe I've forgotten it, or maybe when I need it again. So writing blog posts started with that thought in mind, right? It was always for my reference, and also if other people get helped with that. So it started like that, but then it transitioned into people actually being helped out of the blog post that I was writing. And then that's when the realization or the motivation comes into picture, and you feel that, oh, you should continue this because this is actually helping people, not two, not three, but many people, many developers, right? So I think that's where the motivation came in. And I would say in the beginning, it didn't really start like a motivation. It was just a process. It was just a practice or an effort, daily effort that you do, right? As an engineer or a regular hard worker, I would say. I didn't try to call myself hard worker, but you get the idea, right? Yeah, so I think that's how it began. Then later it transitioned into more types of content creation with open source activities, with speaking opportunities that I started getting out of as a result of the blog post. So a lot of people also think that speaking opportunities are an achievement, right? Which I really think it's not. It's just an outcome of the hard work that we've done in terms of the content that we have created. It could be written content, it could be the code content that we've provided. So yeah, I think I have answered the first part of your question, which is not being only on the consumer side. Also, there's this interesting thing that you said, right, that 80% people are the consumers, whereas only 20% are developers. I think there's this overlap of people who are 50% consumers and 50% the producers as well. So I think I would like to put myself in that category. I explore a lot of the bugs that I come across, and look up for the information. Hey, has anybody solved that before? Maybe somebody tries could help me with this bug that I'm struggling with for half an hour or more. So yeah, that's the consumer side of me. But then on the producer end, when I put my creative hat on and I decide to write a blog post or decide to solve some bugs somewhere, some issues existing, yeah, so that's about being the producer on the other end. What was your second question again?
Yeah, so the second question was around Web Alamanack. So it was, from what I could gather, it was a very research heavy article. So I just wanted to gather your thoughts, like how did that idea came along, and then how was your process behind doing all that research around JavaScript, and then how much time it took with that. So if you can just take us through that journey.
Sure. And it has a story behind it. I'll start with that. I was working towards the performance of my application that I was building at work, right? And we were done with building the basic MVP, which was required. But then after that, there's this stage in your development journey, right, where you decide to work on refactoring the code and increasing the performance of your existing code base. That's what I was doing back in, I think that was around May 2021, when I was working towards the performance of my application. And I was exploring a lot of stuff, right? And that's when I came across this issue on the HTTP archive repository, GitHub repository. It was looking for JavaScript authors, right? The idea of the Web Almanac is that it's an annual report which states the statistics around the features of a particular tech being used or not. Basically, how the web is evolving over the years, what are the features which are leveraged well, which are the features which are not being used very well, what are the stats of that, how many people are using a particular feature correctly, how many people are using a particular feature maybe wrong and not leveraging, the performance benefit that they could get out of it. So yeah, that was the idea. And I thought that this totally aligned with my current interest back in, May 2021. And now I think I would say that it was a very good idea that I chose to do it, because you also get a lot of learning, if not just giving out the data. You also learn in the whole process. So yeah, I decided to contribute as one of the authors to the JavaScript chapter, but it actually turned out that I was the only JavaScript chapter only author of the JavaScript chapter of Web Alamanack 2021. Yeah, so I'll tell you about how the process was, right? And this is very interesting to somebody who is looking for something similar.
Yeah.
It started with a lot of research around how you want to build your chapter. I will take the reference of the JavaScript chapter because that's what I was working on. So the very first step involved preparing the outline, which involved exploring the newer features added to JavaScript, or if not newer, quite some recent features, and then looking for the stats around that. How many people have been using it? Is some feature being not picked up at all? Is some feature very well picked up and adopted, right? So that was the outline part of it. The next step was looking for what you want to get out of the data. We scraped 8 million websites, and they were scraped like every month for the data that we were looking for, right? So it was from, I think, starting August when the scrape started, or no, it actually started before, but it finished in August. And then we got the data from those 8 million websites. The second step was writing custom.
You scrapped those websites just for this project article.
Yes. So the websites were scraped as a part of the project for 24 chapters of Web Almanack, not one chapter.
Okay.
Yeah. So those many websites were scraped for the data that we were looking for. It could be the response bodies of a website's initial page load. It's only the initial page load, but not the whole website, obviously. And also that was the first response that we got out of the scrape. And also the other information that we were looking for, which could be, only received by the custom metrics that we have written in the JavaScript code. So for example, a page has loaded, and you want to run some code on that loaded page to find out, for example, how many tags are used dynamically, not in the initial page, but dynamically, which is when the page has loaded, and that's when the elements get added. This is a bit technical, and I think only the people who are working with JavaScript might be able to understand this. But yeah, the idea was to get the data out of those 8 million websites, something that's already there in the initial page load, and something that gets dynamically added, and you get that through the code. That was the second step, which got us a lot of data, right? We felt like we had a lot of power in our hand now to explore that data and analyze that. The third step was actually writing SQL queries. It was actually BigQuery that we were using. BigQuery is another SQL language that we were using to get the data in our format that we needed, and then use it for our analysis. So I remember I can give 2-3 examples, right? So if you're working with JavaScript, you would know that there's a script element which uses attributes like async and defer. They have their own purposes, but the idea is to better perform with our requests that we make in the browser. So we looked for the usage of async and defer attributes. What's better? We also looked for the usage of if any browser or website allows differential loading, if there are 2 bundles created out of the content, right, out of the JavaScript bundle that's created in the browser. So yeah, such things were analyzed as a part of the whole process that we did in Web Almanack. I think it was December 1 when we finally launched the whole written content, which was actually writing the whole content was the 4th step after the analysis of the whole data. And the writing part was the toughest, I would say, because that's where all your ideas were thought actually came into picture, right? When you're actually writing about anything that you thought of. So yeah, that was the most difficult part of it. But yeah, December 1 was the launch date when it finally went live, and a long chapter that was written with all that data from 8 million websites. And it was not one chapter but 24 chapters going live, and everybody, the whole community getting excited, not just JavaScript, There was other things like performance, PWA, which is progressive web components. So things like that. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I
And
think, yeah, sorry.
no, please go on.
Yeah. When you were narrating this, uh, it was just running in the back of my mind, like how much intense that process might have been. Scraping all these sites, then collecting data, analyzing that data, then making sense of it. I think some real hard work, which was very much evident in the whole um, almanac, right? With all the data points that you gathered and all the analysis that you did, the story around it that you framed. I think it was great. Really, I think it'll be great to read for somebody who's a diehard JavaScript coder or a fan. So when narrating this, uh, it was just running in the back of my mind, like how much intense that process might have been. Scraping all these sites, then collecting data, analyzing that data, then making sense of it. I think some real hard work, which was very much evident in the whole um, almanac, right? With all the data points that you gathered and all the analysis that you did, the story around it that you framed. I think it was great. Really, I think it'll be great to read for somebody who's a diehard JavaScript coder or a fan. So really great work there. Um, Something which also came to our mind earlier when we were talking about the Stack Overflows thing, right? So I'm not sure if you've heard, this is a guy on Twitter, Noel Ravikant. I'm not sure if you follow him or not, but
I have read his book also.
oh, nice. The Almanac
Yeah,
of
the
Noel
Almanac
Ravikant.
of Neil Ravikant. Yep.
Yeah, I sort of follow him a lot with his tweets and podcasts and everything. So he said this one really good thing, probably in his book or podcast, I'm not sure, but the good thing about technology is that you have to solve a problem only once, right? So any kind of problem that you're getting while coding, you have to solve that once and put it on Stack Overflow, and the whole community um, can get the solution of that problem from there, right?
And
So
that is so true.
yeah, so that is exactly what fascinates about me on technology. Like one thing builds on top of another, mostly, um, right? So you have these packages, you have these SDKs, and you just plug them in, build on top of that, customize it, and then you ship it. So I think that's really fascinating about technology. So like with your alumni, right? So somebody who really wants to know what's the current performance of JavaScript, they can actually refer to that, and then they can move forward with the project. So that
Exactly.
that really, yeah.
And I think that's the power of open source, right? Back in the days when everybody was writing code, everybody was solving problems, but it was their own code base, right? Private code bases. And that was still helpful because people would still post bugs that they were getting, but in terms of a solution, people are not getting much benefit. And now with open source evolving so much, you see your comment about one thing building on top of another validates so much because there's so much code out there. For example, I saw recently Zomato open source one of another project of theirs, right, which is very interesting. I saw recently, I think it was Airbnb's code is a lot of it is open source, but recently they open sourced one more project of theirs, which is so good for engineers and budding engineers who are looking for tough code to explore, right? Code base, they don't have a commitment that they have to work towards it. They can just look at it. It might be overwhelming in the beginning, but then you start getting a sense of the whole code base later on.
Yep. Yeah, that's the awesome part about working in tech. Great. Um, this brings us to the next part of the discussion. I was really curious with, so what you have learned in the past about code and mostly front end full stack development. How do you see the space evolving in the future? In a sense that, so there's lot of things that are happening, like in the micro level as well, but in the macro level as well, with regards to Web3, metaverse coming into picture, and so I think all these technologies would be front end heavy, right? You need a kick-ass front end sort of to really make them uh, you know really make them robust to the user, because it'll be like 100% digital, right? So 100% immersive and stuff like that. So how do you uh, I think you did a talk recently which was around Web3. So how do you see your kind of work evolving in the future with regards to languages, frameworks, libraries? What is technically the next big thing?
Yeah, interesting question. I've been asked this question a lot actually. And I think with every new interesting thing that comes up, we start thinking about the existing things and their presence and their existing nature, right? And how they would evolve in the future. But I think that doesn't really apply to the existing things if they are purposeful and, if they have like a strong, long way to go. For example, people are talking about Web 2 being gone with Web 3, but there's so much right now on the web, in the JavaScript community in general right now, that is still to explore. For example, some time back we didn't really think of something like for example, HTTP 3 protocol coming in, right? But that did and made everything so fast in the browser. We didn't really think of servers coming within browser. I mean, to run any project, we need to install Node on our system currently, right? And then with Node installed on our system, that's when we run the server and a website gets live and runs in our local. We don't need to do that now, right? That's a recent web container thing that has been introduced, which lets you run Node inside your browser. So there are things like this and many more things which could be done in the browser. There's WebAssembly now, right? Which lets us run JavaScript and other languages in the browser. So I think with a lot of things that still are to be explored, and there's always one thing that comes up after another thing. Uh, the existing thing is definitely not going anywhere, and I'm not really sure if I have any comment on Web3, but that is again a place, an area still to explore. A lot of things are coming in there, but yeah, the existing space is definitely not going anywhere. We would still need a lot of websites. We would still need a lot of engineering in general, right? It's not just about front end or back end. It's about engineering in general. It's about solving problems in general, and I'm sure that's definitely not going anywhere.
Great. No, that's a good way to look at it. I am also a firm believer of the fact that with all these latest things coming in, I think the Web 2.0 per se is here to stay for a long, long time. I think Web 3 probably could be a bigger market, but I think the web, I think they'll coexist probably in the future, and then a lot of Web 2 technologies would be used probably to build Web 3, and then as the tech world evolves, every second there'll be new technologies, new frameworks probably dedicated to Web 3 and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's a great way.
Yeah, and I have something fact-based here to mention, right? So when I was working on Web Almanack, now we see that with a lot of frameworks coming in, we suddenly start feeling that, oh, Angular is gone. This is the new framework that people are adopting. That's not the case. When I was working for the Web Almanack and we were looking at the data from 8 million websites, only 20% of framework websites were using frameworks. All of the other ones were still using CDNs, right? WordPress, Shopify, such platforms. So with the framework era, which is for a while now, I think more than 10 years, around 10 years for sure, right? With this much time, with the frameworks that we have, we still have only 20% websites that are, in fact, adopting frameworks. So you see, the adoption rate is very slow. And when you look at the larger population, the larger code bases or database in general, you realize that we are only looking at the high level, the 1%, the maximum 5 to 10% of the industry. We forget to look about the legacy code bases which are there, for the 80%, for example, 80% of the data of the websites which are using WordPress still. I mean, you would think, why would they still use WordPress? They can just get engineers and get them to code in Angular, on React, or any other framework. Just get into the latest new things, right? So that's the adoption rate is very slow.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the reasons could be that the ease of use thing that they have, right, is really what pulls the users or creators to build these.
Right.
Like I think that 20% those who use frameworks are really, those tech heavy websites who are really have customizations built in. But I think for the general web, I think WordPress serves the purpose really, really well. And I think I was exploring it quite recently I was really curious about the no code or low code wave that's going in. So I was a bit curious. I was reading around it. What do you think about that? Is it like a pivot to the current framework that we have, or like where does it fit into the picture?
So I think I would like to put it in another category where people, do not want to get into the hassle of hiring people to do something, of, trying to customize things themselves. So no code, low code solution is for them who are just looking for putting up something live, with some information that's, for example, a regular intro website, right, which definitely does not require a tech heavy framework. They would just want to go with WordPress for that, right? And I've seen organizations with great engineers do that, just go for WordPress for such a similar simple thing. But then when you know that there's a lot of need for customization, where you know that the existing for example, the boilerplate code which is there is not going to help them, because they need to customize, they want to be flexible within with the thing that they're building, with interesting, for example, styles and animations that they want in their website. I think that's when the no code, low code solution kind of, backfires. And then that's where the need for flexibility comes into picture, for customization comes into picture. And you need to get us, right? Engineers.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's so this friend of mine who's a front end dev I was talking about, right? We have these heated discussions that, like I sometimes joke that, the low code, no code thing would take over in traditional development, and he's like, no, it'll never happen. We have these jokes around that. So definitely, I think that's a subset of what a solution which probably requires less effort, and you can ship really basic stuff fairly early. But definitely the real tech is what will drive the future, right? With all these new things coming up. So
yeah. And with such a vast industry, we can never say if something new can replace the existing one, right? They can always coexist. Like half of the population can go for
definitely.
no code, low code solution, but then there's a lot of other engineers and industry which wants to customize things. So it's always going to coexist.
Yeah, definitely 100% agree on that. Cool. So this brings us to the next part. Basically, I was really curious because a lot of listenership of this podcast are really young folks. So I thought it would be great to ask you this. So if you have any advice for somebody who's either getting into front end development or somebody who's transitioning from front end to full stack, what would it be? And then if you have any tips, like great resources, books, methodologies they can follow to make that transition or make their knowledge base stronger, I think if you can share that, that'll be great.
Sure. I think about the question about transitioning from front end to full stack, I think the mindset should be on solving problems. Eventually it should just be about engineering things and trying to get the work done at first, not about learning a particular language and trying to upskill ourselves in that, because it comes as a part of the process. When you're learning something, when you're trying to do something and you have to figure out how to get it done, that's when you learn, right? It's not like you spend I mean, you obviously have to spend time on learning, but what I'm trying to say here is that a language is not your goal. Your goal is to solve the problem, right? Give out a solution, and that can be based with anything that you liked, one language that you liked in the process, one language that helped you in the process, or one language that was the requirement of the organization, right? So that part depends on that. But on the second part of your question, where there could be some of the books, I think the books that I would say mention will also be very general, which focus on better code practices, which I'm still following and I still like to follow. One is Clean Code, obviously, and a lot of engineers. It's not obvious actually, because a lot of the listeners will be new to this, so it's not obvious to them. I said that this is obvious because we as engineers are always surrounded by such books when we are trying to write the code better, write it performant, and write it write actually clean code. So that's one. Then there's another one which is called Pragmatic Programmer, right? And this talks about the daily coding in the engineering struggles, where there's, for example, problems like when you're failing in implementing something, you try to put the blame on some of the other things. Like I'll tell you one of the things that I do when I'm not getting the focus that I need for my work. I would start blaming the environment for that, and that is never true, because if I want to get the work done, if I want to keep the focus, I will get the focus and get it done, right? Because all my focus will be on the problem. But then if I'm quite distracted due to some things, I would start blaming the environment. Oh, this light is extra. Oh, maybe this desk is not good. Oh, maybe I should shift to the other room, and that might help. So yeah, such engineering problems are also mentioned in the book The Pragmatic Programmer, and I think you would love that read if there are engineers who are listening to this. And there's another book which is called AI 2041. This is a fiction. This is written in form of fiction, but then it talks about the AI aspect in the later years, right? How AI could impact our general lifestyle and the daily things that we do in the year 2041. So that as well could be an interesting thing. If you could link those in the description, Kinshuk, that would be great, because yeah.
Yeah, I took note of these. Definitely, those are really good suggestions. I'll link those in the description later. AI 241, I think I'll pick that up because I was looking for some good book recommendations on science fiction and stuff like that. I've been reading a lot of self-help lately, and I think I've become tired of that. So it'll definitely be a good change of taste. I'll definitely pick that up. That's yeah.
This another one that I would like to highlight, since you mentioned self-help books. There's this great book which is not code related in general, but it's called Deep Work, and it really focuses on your the working habits. I mean, in especially with COVID coming in, right? We all of us started working in shallow environments, right? There's deep work, and then there's shallow work. I'll try to just put it in a very just format, where the book talks about that there's deep work and shallow work, and all of us are in general 80% of the time working with the shallow format, right? Where we might have our phone on one side, our family on the other side, maybe some interesting video that's running on the other side, right? And then there's deep work, where you're disconnected with everything but just the problem in your head and the solution for that. And I think there's only 5 to 10% of our work that we do like that. If you use more than that percentage, you're doing great already. But if you're not, we are all working in shallow environments, especially with the phones which we are always connected to, right? The book also highlights an example of the Harry Potter book that the author was writing, right? She was not able to spend time on the writing of on I think the 6th part, and she was very frustrated because she was not getting time due to the family. And what she decided to do,
she booked a hotel, I think.
Exactly. So she moved to a hotel to write that chapter, to get the deep work mindset. So that's an interesting read as well.
Yeah, I think I just remembered I have read I'm not sure if I've read the book completely, but I've read that story somewhere. That's a great story, and I think Deep Work is a great book as well. A lot of folks have recommended that, so definitely a great book. I'll link all these in the description so that anyone who really want to get hands on them, they can get it on Amazon or anywhere else. Great. So this kind of wraps up the tech heavy discussion, but I reserved the last part to some really fun lighthearted questions. So we'll keep all the tech jargons aside and let's have some fun with the discussion. So I want to start with your hobbies. So I know with all this work that you do, it really gets stressful at times, and then so just wanted to know, like, when you're not sitting in front of a computer coding or writing, what do you do, to just restress yourself and uh, to really calm your mind after a really long day of work? When I was really again preparing for this podcast, I was going through your Twitter. I was not stalking, but really preparing for the podcast. So I saw that you have some short videos where you're playing your piano. So is that something you do? Like, are you a professional piano player, or is it something that you do as a hobby?
Uh, right. So I'll talk about my hobbies first. I usually love books, right? And it could be in the form of writing books or reading books, not fiction, mostly tech related. But yeah, I would either write books or read books in my free time. Mostly read. I am still very much a consumer on the books side, reading side. But yeah, I also prefer writing sometimes. That's basically what I do when I'm not coding or in front of the computer. Apart from that, I recently started playing the piano. When I say recent, it means like I think a year now. And I'm not a professional keyboard player, but yeah, I've learned some good techniques on the piano. There's an arpeggio format that I've learned, and yeah, really enjoy doing that.
Great. No, I was I think the video that you put out was Beethoven's Symphony, and that was, I think, great. It sounded really good.
Yeah,
So
that's one of my favorite pieces because I think I tried to perfect that one the most. I've spent the most time on the Fur by Beethoven. So and there are some Hindi songs as well which I tried playing. So yeah,
awesome.
but those are the hobbies. I was not much related to music before that, except for the piano that I now love.
Great, great. So it was like self-taught or online lessons, in-person lessons? How was it? How did you learn?
I actually took home classes for that in
Okay.
person. Yeah, it's always better, as compared to the online version of it, because a lot of things just come in impromptu, right? When you're learning when in person.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's a great hobby. I used to play piano and guitar as a kid. Didn't really pursue it much later, but yeah, I think it was fun. Um, so something related to this. So do you have like a routine or a mindfulness practice which you do like every day, like sports, yoga, meditation, anything that keeps you sane?
Actually, not. I'm really a bad example for this. Do not follow me. I have a really bad discipline and routine. I cannot even call it a routine. So I would wake up, start, open my laptop, and sit all day and then sleep with the laptop on my side. So definitely not going to share more on this because I'm not the right example. But I've tried yoga. Actually, when I was working with IBM, I used to go for boxing classes, and I did
Hmm.
for 3 to 4 months. But then all my relatives started complaining that you're getting skinnier, and decided to stop. So
Okay.
but yeah, I've never been able to continue any discipline or routine that I've tried to follow.
Okay. Okay. Cool. That's pretty okay. I mean, until unless you're not stressing out yourself too much, I think that's fine. But I think I recently I think it was mostly during the pandemic and everything else. I started experimenting with meditation, yoga, um, and I still don't follow it regularly, but I do it a couple of times a week, and I think it is transformational to the way it changes and relaxes your mind. So you have to do it consistently for a period of time, then you realize that some sort of positive changes are happening. So really love that. Although I would miss it one day and do it the other day. No, not a regular routine, which I really want to make, but it's good. And I think every day I go for a walk, either in the morning or the evening, which is therapeutic to me. Really absorbing some sun outdoors, and looking at the nature, which is really great. So something, if you want to try, just take like a 30-minute break from your coding session and then just go for a walk downstairs. I think it's great as well. Awesome. So we talked about books a lot. My next question was around books as well, but you already recommended a lot. Do you I'll reframe this question in a sense that, so what's the current book that you're reading, and what's the book which is on your bedside table currently?
Actually, two of them. So there's one that I've already highlighted, which is AI 2041 that I'm currently reading. I'm on the third chapter, and it's really, really interesting. The recent chapter that I read is called Twin Sparrows, and it's about two kids who have their own, bot with them, a physical bot. So they're talking about AI in the year 2041, right? So now they can, kids can have bots with them who will, prepare the curriculum for them, who will prepare that, this is what their daily schedule should look like. So very interesting. There's one boy who, makes good use of the bot, but then the other boy who doesn't make very good use of the bot, AI bot that he has. So yeah, that's one. The other one is based on, it's towards the, it's the story of Myanmar, a country, and it's called My Myanmar Years. It's not related to coding. It's not fiction. It's the story of that country. Basically, it Myanmar's relations with India.
Awesome. That seems to be a nice read. So do you generally pick a fiction, like a tech and non-tech book every time you're reading? Is it something you try to balance with?
I try to, yeah, but like most of my reads are non-tech. I mean, if it's a physical book, they're mostly fiction or self-help books sometimes. But then yeah, some great books which are technical and are recommended, I read those as well. But yeah, they're very few as compared to the number of the fiction books.
Okay. On the topics of books, just curious. So the habit of reading, you are an avid reader, as you mentioned. So did you pick this habit up when you were fairly young, or is it something that you acquired recently, like after growing up?
I think it was during the university years when I started reading, because I remember in school I was not a reader at all. It was during university when I started, and in the early years of my work, like I remember in the year 2020 I read 34 books in the year, right? 34, which was a great number, I felt. And in 2021 it was not even 15. So that's how it drops when you're working on projects. So yeah, I think I cannot call myself an avid reader now, and my focus also has reduced a lot in reading. I get distracted by a lot of things, but yeah, the number I like to keep around 30 or more for my books of the year.
Awesome. 30 is quite a lot. I mean, I think you're a fairly quick reader. I used to read when I was a kid, but then I stopped it somehow, picked it up again during my university days, just like you. But what I realized is that I'm a pretty slow reader compared to the general people. I take my own time with the books. I would read and reread books until I gather most of the subject, and probably would take 3 or 4 weeks to go through a book. But I think you have a great speed, so that's
no
awesome.
But I think I would like to really commend you on that, because being a slow reader is actually very good. You gather information, you keep it with you, and being a fast reader is good with the books that are supposed to be read like a fast reader. But then there are books which demand rereading them. For example, AI 2041 is a book which demands reading it very slowly, and I'm only on the third chapter right now. It's been more than 3 months that I've had this book that I got it. But yeah, it's also a bit like a textbook, right, which becomes boring at some points when there's the fiction part is gone. So it can get difficult at that stage.
Awesome.
And being a slow reader really needs patience, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, the reason what I feel I'm a slow reader is because I think I'm a distracted reader in a sense that currently I'm reading 2 books. One is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Got enough recommendations for that, so that I finally had to dig in. The second one is around product management, something which I'm really curious about. So what will happen is that if I get, like, throughout the book, if there's a mention of certain framework which really I'm really curious about, I would go, I would just search that framework on Google and read more about it. So a lot of distractions keep on happening, and then you realize that you are just off the book. You're reading something else, some other article. So that really slows me down. So I've really tried to keep myself centered around the book. Really, I would take notes or just highlight it and refer to them at a later stage, so that I can read a bit quicker. But yeah,
there is one thing that I would like to highlight, which is I think I was a great focused reader until the point when I was reading physical books. And then I remember in 2020 end or 2021 beginning, I started reading books on the computer or the phone. And that's when my reading habit really got screwed up, because then I was a distracted reader because of the notifications or just switching tabs on the computer, right? So yeah, that I would always switch tabs or applications when I was reading on computer. So I think switching to physical books from ebooks is a great idea if you're not able to, becoming not able to become an avid reader or just being distracted.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. My kind of reading is split 50-50 between the Kindle on an iPad and then physical books. So, but yeah, I was 100% Kindle at some point of time, which was really distracting, but I'm now coming back to physical books. So that's a great suggestion. Cool. So this brings us to the last question for the podcast, but I have a bonus question, which I'll also would like to ask. So the last question which I had already prepared was, this is something which I'm experimenting with, picked up from another podcast. So I won't take credit for it, but I really like the question, so I would like to ask you that. So when you're old and you look back on your life, what do you think would matter the most to you?
Okay. Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. And I would have to think a bit to answer this. So when I get old and look back on my life, what is the thing that matters the most to me? I think I have a very straightforward answer to this, which is that if I was kind to people during the whole process, the whole journey or not. Because, and I'll tell you why I think like that, right? If it's related to the work, and if the work mattered the most to me, I would like to see the purpose of it, how many lives it impacted. So if it's directly connected to that cause, then that would definitely matter to me. But ultimately, that also, depends on me being kind in the whole process. So that's the work side of it. On the fun side, when you're having fun, when you're enjoying your life, even then, the thing that comes back to your mind is how many people were happy in your presence, right? How many people didn't feel like they are maybe low as compared to you, or were they intimidated by you? If they were, did you do something about it? Were you kind enough to, were you welcoming enough to allow people be happy and just be them in your presence? So I also read this thing recently where somebody said that if in your presence somebody has to change the way they talk or change the way they behave, change the way they are in general, then you've failed as a person. Because if your presence demanded somebody to change, somebody's behavior, or just basic, just them to change, then you were not right. You were wrong somewhere. So yeah, I think that would matter the most to me.
Great. That's a really beautiful note. So technically, how many lives did you light up during your journey is what I think you're trying to convey, which is actually a great notion. Awesome. So this one is a bonus question. So because we were talking before the podcast, and you mentioned that you'll be moving to Germany with your new job very soon. So my question is that what is something that you down the line miss from India being there at Germany? What do you think now you'd miss the most?
Okay, so I was just thinking about the whole thing, right? When you were actually asking the question, instead of focusing on your question, I was already thinking about the answer, which we always do. So I think the very special thing about India is that people here are very cordial, right? They're very friendly, and we miss out on this when we are outside India, when we're abroad. I'm not trying to generalize this, but that's the basic notion, that in India people are very friendly, they're very helpful. Sometimes they're not, but that's again about generalizing it. So I think that's what I'll miss the most, which is those connections that you develop on the roads, right? I went for a community fellowship in Jharkhand, and I think that's the best connections that I've built in all the things that I've done, not at work, not anywhere, but in that village where I was working towards the goals that I was supposed to do. So I don't think I would get to do something like that again in any other country that I go to. Those connections, so I think that's what I miss the most. And I think I would always want to come back to that particular thing. Definitely I would always want to come back to how people are quite reserved in themselves, especially in the villages in India. And you would know this, right? In villages, when there are people reserved, but then they see someone, as an example, they see someone who's vocal and expressive about their thoughts and ideas, and then the people in the villages, the women especially, they try to open up looking at that, and they try to block, and kind of break those windows and see the world outside. So yeah, I think that's what really matters to me, and I think I would want to come back to that.
Awesome. That's great. And probably food, right? I mean, food is something that if you're a foodie, I'm not sure, but food is something which whenever I'm traveling outside, it is something I really look back to, because I think the flavors and in India and everything else is just unmatched. But yeah, definitely, the warmth that people have here is definitely unparalleled and hard to find. But I really hope that you find the same warmth in the same culture and same experiences out there as well. So we'll wrap this up here. It was a great discussion, Nishu. Thanks for taking all the time to do this, and I really wish you all the best for your journey ahead. And let's stay in touch. Definitely, when you come next time on the show, you'll be in Germany doing some amazing stuff. So great. Best of luck for that.
Thank you so much. I really love to be here and, answer all the interesting and casual questions that you had. I would really want to come back to this and, answer more questions or ask you some more questions. We really spent way less time asking you questions, but just answering whatever you had on your plate. So yeah, thank you very much for having me here. Please share my Twitter handle in the description if people would like to connect, because there I'm sure people would have a lot more questions that while listening to the podcast, and I would like to clarify those if they have.
Definitely. So, yeah. I'll add your Twitter, the link to your blog, and all of that we discussed in the podcast as show notes. So that'll be great for anyone to looking to reach out to you or learn more from you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me here.
All right.